Everyone knew her as Granny from the Beverly Hillbillies, but Irene Ryan was hiding something shocking. She was only 5 years older than the man who played her son-in-law. At 60, she lied to get the role because they said she looked too young. While earning $500,000 a year, she lived in a tiny house with broken furniture. She never had children, but spent her final days completely alone. The woman who made millions laugh died forgotten, and what happened to her house after death will break your heart. Irene Ryan was born as Jessie Irene Noblet on October 17, 1902, in El Paso, Texas. Her father, James Noblet, worked as a low-ranking Army sergeant at Fort Bliss. Her mother, Katie McSharry, had come all the way from Ireland hoping for a better life. They didn't have much. They lived in a small home near downtown El Paso, and Irene was born right there, not in a hospital. Fort Bliss was growing fast back then because of the Mexican Revolution, which had already started in 1910. By 1915, nearly 6,000 soldiers were stationed there, and it was a tense time. That military tension was part of Irene's early world. With her father's low pay and the rising conflict right across the border, the family struggled just to get by. Food wasn't always guaranteed. The chaos of the Mexican Revolution had crossed the border. El Paso wasn't just a town anymore. It had become a place full of refugees, revolutionaries, and danger. Violence came close. People like the Noblets had to rely on charity just to eat. Irene was still a child, but she felt real hunger. It stuck with her. It made her want something more out of life. It made her fight hard, even as a little girl. The local shops were often empty, prices were high, and safety was never promised. On top of that, vigilante groups had formed. These were not safe times. Her family lived in tight quarters and shared spaces with others. That struggle, that need to survive, shaped Irene into someone tough and observant. She basically grew up alone. Her only sister, Anna, was born in 1885. That made her 17 years older. By the time Irene could talk, Anna had already moved out. So Irene lived like an only child, always surrounded by adults. She heard grown-up talk every day about the army, money troubles, and the war nearby. She learned to keep herself entertained. She learned to listen. She became sharp, independent, and mature beyond her age. She had no one to play with, but she paid attention. And all of that helped her later, when she had to play complex roles and stand on tough stages. She also began to crave attention and applause because she grew up without much of either. At age 11 in 1913, she finally had her first real taste of joy on stage. It happened in San Francisco at the Valencia Theater. She sang a song called Pretty Baby in a talent show and won first prize. They gave her $3, which would be around $98 today. But it wasn't the money that changed her. It was the sound of the crowd clapping. That sound filled her with something powerful. She suddenly knew this was her way out. Her mother didn't approve. Katie believed show business was dangerous, even evil. She once told Irene, "If you ever meet the devil, it'll be backstage." But Irene didn't listen. That $3 win was everything. It gave her a dream, and she wouldn't let go of it. When she was 14, Irene did something bold. She lied about her age to get into a California theater company. The law didn't allow anyone under 16 to work in theaters, so she told them she was older. And it worked. They hired her. That job became her first real step into the entertainment world. She knew the risk. If she was caught, she'd be thrown out. But she didn't get caught. She proved she could do the work, and she earned her place. That lie, small as it was, showed how far she'd go to escape the hunger and hardship she knew too well. At 15 in 1917, she left high school with only 2 years finished. Her father had died in 1913, and her family needed help. She joined the Ed Redmond Traveling Theater Troupe and hit the road. Her mother was against it at first, but someone convinced her. A man at Joyland Park in Sacramento said, "This kid's got talent." That was enough. By August 1918, Irene was back performing in El Paso with the troupe. Now 16, she had become one of their main stars. The show promised 1 hour and 90 minutes of cyclonic entertainment, with wild lighting, costumes, and stage effects. Her life had fully turned. She wasn't a student anymore. She was a working actress. She stayed in the hard world of vaudeville, where the work was non-stop and the crowds were brutal. In San Francisco, she played silly characters with a sharp edge. She sang songs like "I'm Old Enough for a Little Lovin'" and "Sweet Babette." Her singing made people laugh and cheer, but the pressure was high. At the same Valencia theater where she once won $3, performers who failed were yanked off stage with hooks. The crowd threw eggs and tomatoes at acts they didn't like. It was sink or swim. So Irene learned fast. She sharpened her timing. She became quick and clever. At just 15, people called her a chic soubrette, a stylish little star. Offstage, she kept working, studying music, and even Spanish. The theater world back then was full of rough men and loud crowds. Irene had to be tough. She once said she wouldn't get hit with garbage if she sang loud enough. That became her rule. Keep them entertained, and you're safe. She stood just 5'2", but she had presence. She learned something strange about fame, too. She said actresses lost their mystery when they talked too much. By 1921, she was ready to go out on her own. She teamed up with a man named Johnny Rader and formed a duo. They performed a show called The Biggest Liar in the World at the Texas Grand. She was just getting started, but the money was still awful. From 1917 to 1921, Irene was performing 8 shows a week for very little pay. If she got sick or missed a show, she'd be replaced without question. So she never missed. Even when she felt terrible, she showed up. She and the troupe lived simply, often sharing rooms and splitting meals. The productions were huge, with lights, costumes, and effects, but the people behind them had barely enough to survive. Irene never forgot that. The fear of being poor never left her. It's why, even when she made it later in life, she always handled her money carefully. She moved constantly during those early years. Between 1917 and 1922, she lived in San Francisco, Sacramento, Phoenix, El Paso, San Jose, and finally, St. Joseph, Missouri. She moved with each show, each new job. The Ed Redmond Company sent her all over. She lived from a suitcase and stayed in cheap hotels. One time, she visited a place with a fancy indoor pool near San Jose and called it a rare luxury. Most of the time, there was nothing fancy. By 1920, she was back with her mother in San Francisco, listed on the census as a theater actress. She had no stable home, no steady friends, and no guarantee of money, but she kept performing. That constant movement trained her for everything that came next. In March 1922, at age 20, she married Tim Ryan, a 25-year-old comedian. Together, they became Tim and Irene, later known as Tim Ryan and Irene Noblette. They built a comedy act based on silly misunderstandings, just like George Burns and Gracie Allen. Their timing was perfect. Vaudeville was booming, and stars could earn up to $100 a week, which is about $1,600 today. In only 2 years, they were headlining big theaters across America. The same little girl who once won $3 singing Pretty Baby was now a real star. But there was something strange about their act. On stage, Irene played the dumb, confused wife, and Tim was the smart one, always losing patience. But off stage, it was the opposite. Irene handled their money, their bookings, their contracts. She was the brains. Tim was relaxed and easygoing. He let her run everything. This twist caused tension. Irene hated pretending to be dumb while doing all the real work. Tim felt pressure trying to play the smart one when Irene was the one holding it all together. From 1935 to 1937, they made 11 short comedy films together at Educational Pictures in New York. The studio was known for cheap, fast work. They filmed each short in just 3 or 4 days, working up to 16 hours a day. Sets were minimal. Actors had to do their own stunts. Irene got hurt more than once, but didn't report it. She was afraid of losing jobs. Pay was also poor. They made just $150 to $200 per short, which is around $3,000 to $4,000 today. Still, their timing and chemistry got attention. Their big break came in summer 1936, when NBC asked them to replace Jack Benny on his radio show during his break. Benny's show had a huge audience. Around 28.6% of households listened every week. This was massive exposure, but it also brought stress. They had to memorize a full 30-minute script every week. The arguments during rehearsals became famous at NBC. On the recordings, you can even hear the tension in their voices. That pressure started to destroy their marriage. In 1942, after 20 years together, they divorced. They had no children, and no one ever explained why. Some thought it was their careers. Others thought maybe it wasn't a choice. Irene was heartbroken. She kept the name Ryan, as if she couldn't let go. Their old vaudeville acts were hard to divide. The money wasn't much. Their film contracts were already over. After she divorced Tim Ryan in 1942, Irene didn't waste time feeling sorry for herself. She jumped into radio and found a new voice, literally and emotionally. In 1946, she joined The Jack Carson Show on CBS. She played a candy store and library owner in a small town, and listeners couldn't get enough of her raspy voice. That voice had been shaped by years of heavy smoking, a habit that started during her long vaudeville days. It gave her a sound nobody else had, and it worked in her favor on the radio, even though it would later destroy her health. At that time, she was earning $500 a week, which was a big deal, especially for someone recently divorced and trying to stay afloat alone. But the movies were a different story. From 1935 to 1952, Irene appeared in 36 films. Most were minor roles. Many times, she wasn't even credited. In Jean Renoir's 1947 film, The Woman on the Beach, she played Mrs. Wernecke, but barely anyone noticed. In Bonzo Goes to College in 1952, she played Nancy. In Diary of a Chambermaid in 1946, she was Louise. These films didn't make her rich. Most roles paid only $200 or $300. And even with a lot of screen time, she often didn't get her name in the credits. There were no royalties, no long-term recognition. Casting directors saw her as the nervous neighbor or the fussy friend. That's all they believed she could do. Her vaudeville background made people assume she wasn't serious enough for drama. Her personal life didn't bring much comfort either. In March 1946, she married Harold E. Knox, a film producer who wasn't involved in acting. They had dated for just 2 months before the wedding. It was fast and emotional. Maybe too fast. The marriage lasted 15 years, ending in 1961, but they had no kids, no collaborations, no creative spark. He didn't like the world she worked in, he didn't like the late nights or the people she spent time with, and she felt more and more alone. Starting in the early 1950s, Hollywood began shutting its doors on women her age. She was in her late 40s, and the offers dried up. At 49, she was told she was too old for lead roles, while men her age were still playing romantic leads. That hurt. In Bonzo Goes to College, she earned just $750 for 2 weeks of work. She started taking smaller and smaller roles, even when her talent deserved more. People said she was too old. But the truth was, She was too good for the scraps she was being handed. Even on radio, where she had more freedom, she was boxed in. Producers always wanted her to play the funny old lady. She once said, "A gal can't cry all the time." After being asked again and again to deliver emotional breakdowns, she had more range than they allowed her to show. But they didn't care. Radio work gave her $200 to $400 per episode, enough to live on, but never enough to make her feel seen for what she really could do. Everything changed in 1962. She was 60 and up for the role of Granny Moses on the Beverly Hillbillies. But the casting director said she looked too young. Irene didn't accept that. She called the show's creator, Paul Henning, directly and asked, "Do I have to go home and get my gray wig and shawl to convince you?" She told him about her past in Arkansas and even joked about a theater manager who wouldn't let audiences in early because they'd whittled the seats. Bea Benaderet, who was at the audition, turned to Henning and said, "There's Granny." Irene didn't just audition, she became Granny. The walk, the voice, everything. When the show aired, most people had no idea that Irene Ryan was only 5.5 years older than Buddy Ebsen, who played her son-in-law. She was 59, and he was 54, yet she played someone who looked like she was in her 80s. The makeup team had to use wigs, wrinkles, shadows, everything to age her 2 decades. That transformation helped her land Emmy nominations in both 1963 and 1964, standing next to names like Mary Tyler Moore and Shirley Booth. But behind the scenes, her chain-smoking never stopped. On set, she would light one cigarette from another. She didn't use matches or lighters, she just kept going. That gravelly voice people loved came from her smoking, but so did her health problems. Her co-stars, including Max Baer Jr., were constantly worried about her, but she never slowed down. She also never wasted her money. While she was making $500,000 a year, which was astronomical in the 1960s, she chose to live in a small 1,900 square foot home in Santa Monica at 107 Esparta Way. The house was built in 1915. It had mint green cabinets, a little garden full of bougainvillea, and an old stove. She didn't throw parties or buy mansions. She invested in property and stocks. By 1973, she had over $1 million saved, equal to around $6 million today. She lived with her cats and a few close friends. That was it. She was picky about her lines, too. On the Beverly Hillbillies, she would argue with producers if she felt the dialogue wasn't authentic. She had spent time around real Appalachian people during her vaudeville tours and knew the difference between true dialect and silly stereotypes. She even helped shape Granny's backstory, saying the character loved Jefferson Davis, hated Yankees and revenuers, and was a dunked Baptist, not sprinkled. She wasn't just playing a part, she was protecting a legacy. After the Beverly Hillbillies ended in 1971, most people thought Irene Ryan would quietly retire. But at age 70, she surprised everyone by landing a powerful role on Broadway. She played Bertha, the spunky grandmother in Pippin, which opened on October 23, 1972. Even though she was only on stage for about 10 minutes, she completely stole the show with her number, No Time at All. Audiences were so moved by her performance that they gave her standing ovations almost every night. Some people even clapped in the middle of the show, unable to hold back. Her energy, humor, and timing were unforgettable. The show ended up running for 1,044 performances, one of Broadway's longest runs, and Irene's part became one of the most talked about scenes in the entire production. On March 25, 1973, Irene was nominated for Best Featured Actress in a musical at the 27th Tony Awards. She was 70 years old, going up against younger performers from newer shows, but her role in Pippin was so powerful, that critics believed she truly deserved it. Although she didn't win, the nomination itself was a dream come true. It came after years of working in vaudeville, radio, and television. It was proof that she wasn't just a funny character on TV. She had serious talent and could command a live audience with grace and strength. The choreography she had to perform was designed by Bob Fosse, famous for his intense and physical style. Irene tackled it with so much effort that many people backstage didn't even know she was starting to feel unwell. The nomination came just weeks before her death, adding a bittersweet feeling to what should have been a moment of triumph. Everything changed on March 10, 1973. That day, during a Saturday matinee, something went horribly wrong. Irene collapsed on stage in the middle of her performance. Hundreds of people in the audience watched as she suddenly lost control and had to be rushed off stage. It wasn't a stumble or a mistake. She had suffered a stroke right in front of everyone. She was immediately taken to the hospital in New York, but soon after, her doctors made the decision to fly her back to California. That moment, witnessed live by an entire Broadway crowd, marked the beginning of the end. Back in California, doctors at St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica gave her heartbreaking news. Irene wasn't just recovering from a stroke. They had found an inoperable brain tumor, glioblastoma, the most aggressive type. It was already too late. She also had arteriosclerotic heart disease. The tumor was growing so fast that it explained the fatigue and confusion she had kept hidden from everyone. Still, she had tried to return to the stage. Her love for performing was stronger than fear or pain, but her doctors wouldn't let her. She was told to rest, but what's even more heartbreaking is that she was never told the truth. In a decision that was common at the time, doctors and her family chose not to inform her that her illness was terminal. She spent her final weeks believing she was getting better, when in reality, she was slowly dying. Her co-stars later revealed that Irene had been hiding symptoms for a while. Max Baer Jr., who played Jethro, said she smoked constantly on set and had started showing signs of serious health problems even before Pippin. Bob Fosse, the demanding director, was impressed by her willingness to perform difficult routines despite her age. But behind that strong front, she was struggling. She had severe headaches, mental fog, and physical weakness. Yet she showed up night after night, performing like nothing was wrong. Nobody on the production team knew how serious it really was. She didn't want to be replaced. She wanted to finish what she had started. After being sent home, Irene spent her last days in isolation at her quiet Santa Monica house. She had no children. Her sister had already passed. She never remarried after her second divorce in 1961. There was no one left to care for her full-time. Friends who visited said she was often alone, writing letters and reflecting on the past. She had built a successful career and a $1,000 estate, but she often spoke about how lonely it all felt. She once said, "To really love show business, you have to be of it, not just in it," and she truly lived by that. But in the end, she felt that choosing her career had come at the cost of having a family. The house where she spent her last days became a prison of silence. The same woman who had brought joy to millions was now slowly fading from the world, alone and forgotten by the crowds. She died on April 26, 1973, just 47 days after her onstage stroke. She was 70 years old. Her death didn't make major headlines. The woman who had once made audiences roar with laughter passed away quietly. Her funeral was held on May 1st. There was no grand procession, no massive crowd, just a few close friends and co-stars like Max Baer, Buddy Ebsen, Bob Hope, Bob Fosse, and Ben Vereen. She was laid to rest at Woodlawn Memorial Cemetery in Santa Monica, in a crypt next to her sister. Her tombstone said just one word: Granny. The character that had made her famous became her final identity. After her death, fans were shocked to see what happened to her house at 107 Esparta Way. Built in 1915, it was small but charming. She had made plenty of money, at one point earning $500,000 a year from the Beverly Hillbillies, but never upgraded to a mansion. After she died, with no one to inherit the place, the house quickly fell apart. The roof collapsed, the windows shattered. Weeds grew over the once beautiful garden. Inside, her furniture and photos were left to gather dust. It was like time had stopped, and no one cared to preserve the space where she had spent her final days. Her life vanished not just from the stage, but from the world around her. But even in death, she gave something back. In 1972, just 1 year before she passed away, she created the Irene Ryan Foundation. With no children or family to pass her fortune to, she decided to help young actors. She left her entire $1 million estate to fund acting scholarships. Her foundation partnered with the Kennedy Center American College Theater Festival. Each year, $5,000 is awarded to the national winner, with $500 given to 16 regional winners. More than 50 years later, thousands of students have received help because of her. She turned her loneliness into a legacy, giving others a chance to live the dream she had fought so hard for. Still, the media didn't fully honor her story. When she died, there were no in-depth features, no retrospectives, just short obituaries that called her Granny from the Beverly Hillbillies. It was as if the world forgot how much more she was, how she had conquered Broadway at 70, stood toe-to-toe with Bob Fosse, brought audiences to tears with laughter, and faced death with dignity. Her story was quietly swept away, even though it deserved to be shouted from the rooftops. Behind the smiles and jokes was a woman who longed for family. She had been married twice, to Tim Ryan and then to Harold Knox, but both marriages ended in divorce. She never had children. Friends said she often spoke about that pain in private. Fame hadn't filled the hole in her heart. She sometimes asked if her work would really matter without someone to carry her name forward. But in the end, she created her own kind of family, not through blood, but through talent. She watched the young cast members of Pippin backstage with a quiet, maternal pride. And through her foundation, she made sure that generations of performers would have something she never did: support, encouragement, and someone believing in them.